I'm here to talk about biosecurity, and I've never been to a meeting that had so much biosecurity. Usually it's just me or Josie Traub-Dargett saying, hey, biosecurity, so think about us. But I was given the title from Carl, Logical. I didn't know I did anything logical, Carl. Logical, Implementable BioSecurity Plans for Horseshows. So this all comes from 2012, the whole Ogden incident, and that's where our advisory committee in California said, we need some guidance for horse shows. So it wasn't until I actually went out to the horse shows, now I've grown up doing shows, went out looking, and you don't see it until you're actually looking for it. It's all coming to what are common sense approaches to biosecurity, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So when we talk about Ogden, what really happened there? Well, what we're looking at is the perfect storm. We have a disease agent that entered the showgrounds. So we have horses that are all there, they're stressed. They're now exposed, they're susceptible, and they're now exposed to that disease agent. In the case of Ogden, it was EHV1. So then we have a situation where there's lack of biosecurity at our horse shows. So that means that disease can potentially spread through environmental things that we do at horse shows. So really it was the perfect storm. We got the disease agent in, and there were certain factors within that environment that led to the enhancement of that disease spread at that facility. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about really what is some of the measures that we can take from a biosecurity perspective to stop that disease from entering the showgrounds, or if it is entering, how do we stop it from spreading on the showgrounds? And we're really going to look at what's a logical approach to this. And we talked this morning, we heard about the cost of biosecurity, how it's extraordinary, and that's causing people not to comply with biosecurity. So we're going to really look at what are some low-cost things that can be done by either event managers or the exhibitors themselves. And I call it the common sense approach. Biosecurity from just thinking about common sense, how is the disease going to spread? First thing you have to do, and this is when people call me, they ask me, I need to do something, what do I need to do first? Well, the first thing is, how can a disease enter your facility? So you're going to identify those risks for that disease entry. Is it the horse? Is it the trailer itself? Is it the equipment? Is it the track cleaning equipment or the graders? Is it the farrier, the blacksmith, whomever's coming in? Is it the feed that's coming in? Is it the hay, the grain, that sort of thing? Is it the bicycles or the golf carts or the mechanisms of getting around the showgrounds? In that entry point, is there something dirty on something that's coming in? We all know horses, dogs go together. So are the dogs potentially, what are they bringing in and how can they assist in the spread? And obviously the people that we're talking about. So let's think about when you're coming onto a showgrounds, what are some measures you want to take when you're identifying risk? Well, do the shows stop sick people from coming in or sick animals? The schools do. The schools don't let kids go that have a fever. They're going to send them back home to their parents because they don't want it spreading. So why do we allow in a horse that has a snotty nose to our racetrack, to our showgrounds? Why do we allow in that horse that has a temperature? Did we even check the temperature? Did we not check it for the last 6 weeks? So do we allow those sick horses to come on? That's the first question we have to ask as event organizers. Are we allowing some sick horses to come in? So once we've assessed what's coming onto the property, we need to identify how the disease agent can potentially spread around the facility. And I actually say follow the horse. And that's what I do when I go to the showgrounds that ask me, can you do an assessment? I literally follow that horse from the time it hits the showgrounds at the entry gate. What does it touch? What other animals is it in contact with? Whether it's other horses, livestock, dogs, what is it in contact with? What humans have contact with it. And then as it's going through the day, as it's going through its show, what other exposures does it have? What objects is it touching? What objects are touching another horse and then potentially touching this horse? And one of the common questions I get is, how do we know how much exposure they're getting? Well, any exposure needs to be at least identified so you know what the risks are. For example, in the lower right, there's a lot of shows that do bit inspections. It's great if they're going to have the exhibitor drop the bit, But if you have somebody that's actually going in and touching each horse, that's a potential disease risk. And how do we address that? It simply could be a different pair of gloves each time, or going with what they did here, have the exhibitor drop the bit and not let anybody actually touch that bit or that horse. And this guy literally stood with his hands in his pockets all day. So he didn't touch anything. How often do you share a drink with people? Sober. I'm going to say sober. Let's clarify that. Let's say sober. How often do you really want to think about it and share a drink with multiple people? Why do we allow our horses to have communal water troughs? This is the biggest area where they have, where does the herpes virus come out? I'm going to come out the nose. Where am I going to go? Around that nice communal water trough. And it's going to be on the side, and then you have everybody sitting there drinking. And I have another picture of the same water trough with two people on the horse's back. Actually, the horses are drinking from it. So it's a great way to share bugs, especially herpes virus. And this is one of our huge risk factors at some of these showgrounds. And in California, when I started going around, I saw a lot more of these until I said, do you know what's in here? Do you want to test what's in here? You probably don't want to know. And so we are looking at trying to transition away from the communal water troughs. Oh yeah, so do you want to share this tissue I have? I really just blew my nose once, I swear. Do you want this? Do you have a runny nose? Do you want to use this? So really, why do we do this with our show horses? Why do we have that common nose rag? Yes, we're trying to get them clean and pretty and going into the ring. But again, herpes virus here, herpes virus here, herpes virus here. Great way to spread our disease. This one I have to laugh at because they were doing their best at this place. They were cleaning everything, cleaning. But they never once lifted the mats. What's under the mat? Great place for viruses, bacteria to live. So you can do all these surface cleaning, but you still have that pathogens underneath. So again, that's a risk factor that we need to know what we need to handle. Commingling of horses. This is common at horse shows. We all know that. But we have to think about the risks. So the horses on your right, those two draft horses, that's a working team. They don't have much risk factors because their environment's always the same. Their work as a team, they show as a team. Commingling of those horses is a lower risk than this picture on the left. There is 6 horses there. They came from 3 different states. 3 different disease risk factors. Not just what they're exposed to, but do you know the vaccination and health status of all those horses at the horse show? Now there is great efforts going into getting vaccination protocols at certain events. U.S. Equestrian Federation, that's their first step in their biosecurity, is putting in some vaccination standards so everybody's on the same page. So we can, again, address the risk. But we need to address the risk at the showgrounds. The perfect picture is where it says, do not tie your horse to the fence, and you have 6 horses tied right next to the sign that says that. So you can't just put a policy in place. You need to make sure that policy is being enforced, because why put a sign up or why do something if it's not going to be enforced? So again, addressing the risk. How do we reduce the risk at our showgrounds that you're going to host a show at? I get a lot of event managers going, hey, I just go into this facility. How do I control this? That's the most common question I get asked. Well, first of all, you as the show manager has to take responsibility. And then I also tell the exhibitor they have to take responsibility. Because we have different degrees of biosecurity, whether it's the lowest of biosecurity because you have corrugated board and you have a lot of crevices where the viruses and bacteria can hide, versus the aluminum or the canvas stalls that are easily clean and disinfectable. Now we have to understand that the stalls are portable stalls. They go from show to show. As a perfect example, I went to a show in Northern California and they still had the label on it from a show in Southern California. How clean and disinfectable was that if the label's still on them? We all laugh about it, but again, that's what the show managers are facing. So again, we have to give them the tools to address that in through biosecurity. So they understand their risk, they need to know what they're going into. We really want to promote the horse industry. That's our main proposal here, is promoting the horse industry. We want people to be able to come in, touch the horse, feel the horse. However, we have to think about that from a disease risk. We have little kids, we have people. Do we know where they're coming from? Do we know that they have sick or don't have sick horses at home? and then they're going down the line. There's simple things we can do to stop that by just putting a hand sanitizer at the start of one set of horses and restricting people to use the hand sanitizer before they go on to a different set of horses. Again, the set of horses we are thinking about are all those under the same trainer or the same owner or the same geographic area. Again, identifying risks. Dogs at events. Like I said, dogs and horses go together. Dog on the lower right, this is an interesting dog. I followed it for 10 minutes. It went from barn to barn. The leash was dragged behind it. It dragged through the manure pile, another water bucket pile, and it literally said hi to everyone. By the time it finally got to its home, the owner's like, "Oh, I thought you were tied up in the barn." No, he went on his way. But you do see these dogs on leashes. Well, you have a leash policy. Dog's on a leash. You didn't add dog on leash must be attached to human. So again, rules, we need to clarify what the actual rule is, and what are we trying to do? We're trying to prevent that dog from taking that leash and running it all around the facility and spreading any types of germs. So all of the things I just addressed, so step one was how is the disease entering? Step two is how is it spreading on your facility? And the biosecurity toolkit that we developed in California with the help of Josie Traub-Dargitz and Dr. Madigan at UC Davis, that toolkit has what we call the assessment tools in it. And we call the red light, green light. So everything on the green side is low risk. Everything that you're doing, if you're doing, is on the right side. Red means high risk. Now the thing to keep in mind, I'm not saying you have to make all these changes. You need to be able to identify where your risks are. Because in stage 3, or step 3, you've now identified your risk, you're going to have to implement some type of biosecurity. And the implementation is going to be based on what is going on. How high is the risk? Is there a disease agent out there? What am I supposed to look at? And if we're going to look at a logical, implementable program, there are ways to have a low-cost effort. Low cost to the event manager, meaning they don't have to spend all this money on biosecurity or disinfectants. The first thing they can do is we need to prevent those sick horses from entering. Then we have to look at the stabling, the isolation plan, and health and monitoring during the event. And number 2, communication is critical, as Dr. Fish said, but we need to think about exhibitor education. They need to know what's going on and what is expected of them when they're participating in this event. So let's look at horse entry. So what type of things can we put in place? Well, if you only want healthy horses, only allow healthy horses on. Whether that's an owner declaration, and again, we always hear about the complaint that health certificate's too much money. We'll put the onus on the owner, or the trainer, or whoever's bringing in the horse. And there's an owner declaration statement saying that they've temped the horse for 3 days prior to the event, and they've had no temperature over, you make the decision, 1015 or 102, somewhere in that area. So that's simple. That's the owners doing it. You're not putting the onus on them to get a health certificate. That's one of the easy, low-cost ways of doing it. The other thing you can do to make sure horses are coming on healthy is have them inspected when they come to the event grounds. Have somebody knowledgeable enough to look at clinical signs. And that health inspection can be just once they're in the stall going through, but once they're in the stall and they're already sick, you're now contaminating. So if you have a system to let them in a gradual pattern into the showgrounds, do your inspections as they're coming off. But if you're going to do this, if you're going to have some type of health inspection, have some parameters outlining what you're going to do for the sick horse. Where does that clinical horse go? Where does that horse with a fever go? Animal identification. This is a challenge with horse shows. Some of the larger shows have everything electronic. That's great. But some of the smaller shows, they don't even know who's on the ground, who's come in, or who's left. So they don't even know the identification of the horse that's on the property. And then when you ask them for a list of who's been on the grounds and they give you a mailing list, literally labels, the mailing labels to the exhibitors, and their P.O. boxes with no phone numbers and no email, and you don't link that to a horse, that's a challenge. So again, animal entry, #1 way to stop disease from entering your facility. Stabling. So we need to make sure there's enough stabling. And this is really critical. Because what they do at a lot of showgrounds is, we need more stalls, so what are we going to do? We're going to make the stalls smaller and put more stalls in. That's one way. And number two, oh, we don't need any more tack, so we're going to put the tacks in the aisleway. We don't need any feed stalls, we're going to put the feed in the aisleway. And so we have more and more horses congregated. And again, we may not know if those stalls have been cleaned and disinfected prior. We need to ask the right question, have they been disinfected, and with what and when? The other thing is, when you're stabling horses at an event, you need to stable them so that horses of like status are together. A lot of horse owners want to be with their friends. We understand that. But when it comes to the point of a perfect example, when you have vesicular stomatitis in a few states, you really need to segregate them if you're a state that doesn't normally have vesicular stomatitis. So if you can group them by region, ideally you would have the owners and trainers all grouped together separately. And then you would additionally put in some type of distance between one state of animals and another state of animals. And if you're dealing with a rodeo grounds, we also think about which ones are higher risk animals, which ones are more traveling to different events, not just the rodeo. So those are your exhibit animals, the exhibition, like the vaulting girls or the trick riders. Those aren't just rodeo, so they're not in that exposure risk group. They're outside going to different events. So again, that thought process has to go into your stabling. Limiting human contact, again, if there's going to be human contact, hand sanitizers, very easily, hung on the last door, last stable, and have somebody encouraging the use of them. One of the challenges that they had in Ogden, again, with all the stalls compacted, more horses in there than probably should have been able to be handled. And then what happened was they had airflow and ventilation issues. So again, if you put more horses in there, you need to make sure your airflow and ventilation can handle that, so that you can make sure there's adequate ventilation so you're not going to pass on a respiratory pathogen. So again, the toolkit has specific tools for the event manager on how to clean a stall, how to clean and disinfect a trailer, especially if there's been a sick horse on the property. The other thing is, what are 5 things that the show exhibitor or the participant can do to keep their horses healthy? So we put this poster together, and it's 5 tips. They can avoid direct horse-to-horse contact. They can monitor the horse's health and temperature. So again, looking at the horse, taking temperature twice a day and reporting any temperature over 102 degrees. They can avoid human to animal contact, avoid sharing equipment unless it's going to be cleaned and disinfected in between, and again, avoid those communal water troughs. These are just 5 simple things that the exhibitor can do at the show to protect their horse. Temperature logs. If you're going to have them, somebody has to check them. Kind of like what you were saying, they would bring them up to you. If you're not checking them, it's just a useless piece of paper. And you got to make sure they're actually checking and doing the horses, taking the horse's temperature, not just writing 101 or 98 or whatever from time to time. So this temperature log that we developed also makes them put down if there's any clinical signs, if they're seeing anything. One of the things I want to mention in herpes, we weren't just looking at clinical signs of respiratory and neurologic. We actually saw a lot of horses that were stocking up and it had hind limb edema. And that was something that we've seen routinely on some of these EHV1 cases. So that became a trigger to us that might also be a clinical sign that we need to include on our list. So again, this says, is there clinical signs? And then they can write comments. The most important thing on here, though, is it needs to have a contact person. So when you're getting this temp log, you know who to contact if you have any questions. If you are taking a temperature and having these temperature logs, you need to say 102 is our cutoff. What is the plan when you have 102? And the plan has to be isolation of a sick horse. And you need to think about this in advance. I can't tell you the number of shows I went to, and when I ask them what their isolation plan is or where their isolation stalls are, I get, oh, that last stall on the end of that barn row. I said, in the middle of all the barns? No, that's not adequate. Isolation means get it the heck out of there. Get it as far removed as possible. Whether that's another event grounds, whether that's a fair in the area, whether it's an equine clinic or something that you have an agreement where they can adequately isolate that. So immediately off-site is ideal. Immediately is when you need to do that. So we have a neurologic horse, get it out immediately. Isolation is your critical control point. As soon as you can get that horse out of there, you're not having exposure to other horses. So what should we be isolating? Ideally, anything that has a fever, definitely anything that's neurologic, anything with profuse diarrhea. Now, who do they notify? You need to determine this in advance, because we need to know, here's the fever, person X is responsible for isolating that horse, person W is the one that's going to implement the isolation plan. So all of this has to be done in advance so you know who's responsible and what the action's going to be. And if you need help on setting up an isolation plan, we have a document that UC Davis published, and it's also in the toolkit, is how to set up an isolation unit at a farm or at a horse show. And again, if you're going to send somebody over there, you need to be able to monitor their movement and not allow them in and out. So the people at the gate is critical. And again, looking at who's also been exposed and monitoring those exposed horses and monitoring where their movement is on the showgrounds. It's all about business continuity. We don't want to stop these shows. They're not going to be happy if we stop these shows. So we need to make a plan so that we can move forward. And if you have some of these biosecurity steps in place, we as state animal health officials are going to be more comfortable with allowing the show to continue or the race to continue. The information seems to go to the event managers and then stops. Our exhibitors aren't getting the message in some of the cases. And we really need to get that information out in advance. And you need to say, hey, these are the health requirements we're putting in to protect your horse when it's at the show. And then these are the expectations we expect from you regarding biosecurity. We expect you to monitor your horse. We expect you to notify us immediately if you have a fever or a neurologic case. Don't like hide it. We need to know about it so that we can protect all of the horse. And ideally, we tell people to put it in their premium booklets, put it on their show website, put it in all of their show materials so it's a constant message and it's a consistent message. And then again, on site, biosecurity signs. Don't just be talking about it. Make sure the signs are up. Make sure you have the tips for them. Or, make sure that there's needle containers for safe disposal of needles, that sort of thing. And the bottom line is, if your staff of the event is not practicing biosecurity, no one else is going to do that. And that staff is the vet, that staff is the people that are checking the bits, that is your show stewards, your ring stewards. If they're just going and petting every horse, that's not good biosecurity and they're sending a wrong message. And the bottom line is they need to understand there's consequences when you're educating them on if they fail to do this, there needs to be some type of consequence if they fail to implement some of this biosecurity. So what's the benefit of a biosecurity plan? Well, it's lessening the threats of disease at your event. It's also addressing the well-being of the horses because you're now looking at their health and monitoring them at the event grounds. It improves owner-trainer satisfaction. They now know that their horses are being protected, and they may choose your event because of the biosecurity versus going to the venue that's had an outbreak, that's had a disease. Reduces the risk of liability, and this is talking from the event manager's perspective. And it does provide for forward planning and thinking to ensure business continuity. Now, these are all selling points, and some of the insurance companies for the larger events have bought into this. And USEF and American Association of Equine Practitioners are moving forward with biosecurity this year. USEF is U.S. Equestrian Federation is putting in a biosecurity plan. The first step is an isolation protocol. And they're going to vote on that in June with implementation next year. And AEP, American Association of Equine Practitioners, has now formed a group to put some biosecurity videos together that are going to address the event's biosecurity. So we have a lot more organizations and entities pushing biosecurity, and this is the biggest selling points that we're putting out there. So eventually there's going to be more buy-in, hopefully, within the industry. And again, the benefit to the event manager is we're reducing their liability at their events. So the biosecurity toolkit can be found on this website. I do have CDs with me if anybody would like it. And the CDs actually have the Word version of all of the documents, where anything that has California, you can just take it out and put whatever state you want. So everything is, there's no copyright, and all of the pictures were taken by me, so you can use any of the pictures within the document itself. And again, it is a very large document. I started writing this little document, but the advisory committee that I have said, oh, we want this, we want that. So really what it says is what's your basic biosecurity? If you have a disease outbreak, what's your enhanced biosecurity? And really the meat of it is the tools in the back, which is your checklist, different pictures, and assessments. And acknowledgements, obviously, my boss, Dr. Ken Fowler. And then the co-authors, Dr. John Madigan, Josie Traub-Dargitz, and Ellen Mary Wilson, and my advisory committee who decided this was a good step in the right direction in 2012. Needless to say, I didn't realize I was going to be continuing to talk about biosecurity.